Hi, college. Okay, so today is all about learning figured bass. See these composers? They used it a long time ago. What I'm circling at the bottom is the figured bass. If you look carefully, some are just numbers alone, some are just sharp signs alone, and this one all the way at the end appears to have a slash through the number 6. Interesting. This is the opening of Johann Sebastian Bach's Sonata in C for flute and continuo, written in 1737. Now, the name taken on its own might suggest that this is a piece for 2 instruments. Well, I want you to listen to a recording of this and take stock of how many instruments you hear and what they're playing relates to the music that you see on the screen. Keep in mind that these are the only notes that Bach wrote, so you're actually looking at a complete score. Take a listen. I'm probably not going out on a limb when I say that you most likely heard a flute and perhaps a low string instrument playing the bass line. It's actually a historic instrument called a viola da gamba. Well, if you listen carefully, I bet you heard someone playing chords, in this case on a Baroque harpsichord. As it happens, the second 2 instruments are reading from the bottom staff. So how does the harpsichord know what to play? Well, let me take a moment to point out the numbers and accidentals scattered underneath the staff. Those are bass figures, or figured bass, and their job is to tell people who play chordal instruments, such as the harpsichord, what notes to play above the bass note. Together, the bass line and the numbers make up what we call figured bass. And as a side note, continuo is not an instrument at all. It's whatever group of instruments happens to be reading the figured bass off the bottom staff. The most common is keyboard or a string instrument, which is what we just heard. So figured bass is essentially a shorthand system for notating harmonies above the bass line. We see it a lot, mainly in 17th and 18th century accompaniment parts. What's interesting is that no musical concepts like chords or roots or inversions existed when figured bass was developed so long ago. So the big question, why would anyone care or even want to learn about learning this 350-year-old antiquated concept of figured bass? Well, for a number of reasons. Number one, obviously, if you are a keyboardist or a professional musician who may play a continuo, you have to read figured bass. Also, maybe just historical curiosity. It's fascinating to think about composers in Bach's time and how they didn't think about harmonies in terms of chords and qualities, but in these numbers. And number 3, figured bass is actually still in use today as an analytical tool. You'll find figured bass, for example, on the AP Music Theory exam. That just goes to show you its historical value. I have to mention that figured bass was not invented by one person in a room 300 years ago. It was combined together by many people. So there are slight variations when it comes to putting symbols next to figured bass numbers, which you'll realize a little bit later. Newsflash, this just in. Accidentals can be applied to numbers in a figured bass. The figured bass above allows us to determine the quality of these triads. Can you name them? Well, hopefully you said major for measure 1, minor for measure 2, diminished for measure 3, and augmented for measure 4. The figured bass symbol flat 5 means that the note a fifth above the lowest note is lowered 1 semitone. Take a look at measure 3. Here, our figured bass tells us that we have a flat 5. Therefore, The fifth note above the lowest is lowered 1/2 step. The figured bass symbol flat 3 means that the note a third above the lowest note is, you guessed it, lowered 1 semitone. Let's take a look at measure 2. Measure 2, our figured bass reads a 5 flat 3. The flat 3 means to lower the third above the lowest note 1/2 step. The figured bass symbol sharp 5 means that the note a fifth above the lowest note is raised 1 semitone. Look at measure 4. The figured bass tells us that it's a sharp 5, 3. We take the fifth above the lowest note and we raise it up 1 semitone when we see the sharp. This just in. The following symbols are used to alter a pitch. In other words, to do something outside of the key signature. So we have a sharp sign, a flat sign, and a natural sign. Taken alone, they refer to the third above the bass. If under a triad you see just a natural sign by itself with no number next to it, we need to alter the third above the lowest note. In this case, go from B flat, which is the key signature, to B natural, thus raising it up 1 semitone. In the second measure, we're in the key of G major. We have a 6-3. We won't do anything to the 6 because there's no symbol on it or next to it. The 6 just means we're writing a sixth above the lowest note. However, we do see a flat sign by itself, which means we have to alter the third above the lowest note. Since it's a flat sign, that means that we are going to lower it 1/2 step. In the third measure, we're in the key of F sharp minor, and we have a sharp sign by itself. We don't do anything to the 5. In fact, the 5's not even needed. But when we see a sharp sign alone, it means to alter the third above the lowest note. In this case, the sharp sign meaning to raise it. So we're going from an E to an E sharp. When these sharp signs, flat signs, and natural signs accompany a figure, meaning a number, it means to do this to that note. A slash through a numeral, usually 6, means to raise the note. More on the slash in a minute. Let's take a look at these measures at the bottom. Note our clef, bass clef. In the first measure, we have a first inversion triad. We see the 6, the abbreviated Roman numeral. We have to alter the 6th note above the lowest note. We see a natural 6. In the second measure, we have a second inversion triad. Note the 6-4. But we have a sharp next to the 6, which means that we need to raise the 6th note above the bass 1 semitone. In the next measure, we have a flat 6, flat. Well, the flat 6 means to go 6 above the lowest note and lower it 1/2 step. And the flat sign alone means that we're going to lower the third above the lowest note 1/2 step. In the next measure, we have a second inversion triad. It's 6-4. We have to naturalize the 6th note above the lowest, and we have to sharpen the 4th note above the lowest. In the next measure, we have to sharpen the 5th above the lowest note. In the last measure, we have a slash 6. The slash means to raise the 6th note above the lowest note, going from a B flat to a B natural. The slash in figured bass. A slash through a number means that the note represented by the number is raised 1/2 step. Basically, the symbol sharp and slash mean the same. So here we have our major triad again in measure 1. No notes need to be altered. In measure 2, we have a 5 flat 3. In measure 3, we have a diminished triad, a flat 5 and a flat 3. And in measure 4, we have an augmented triad. Note the slash through the 5 means to raise the 5th 1/2 step. You may also see it appear as this. Same thing. The figured bass symbols /5 and /3 do not always refer to the use of sharps. The raising of a tone by a 1/2 step is sometimes accomplished by a natural sign or a double sharp, and the key signature, if any, must be taken into account. If we look here at measure 1, we happen to be in what major key? Hopefully you said G flat, 6 flats. Our figured bass is a /5/3. That means that we have to travel to the 5th above the lowest note and raise it 1 semitone. Since D flat is in our key signature, we have to go from D flat to D natural and put the natural sign. In measure 2, we're in the key of G major, and we have a /5/3. Do nothing to the 3rd above the lowest note, but raise the 5th above the lowest note 1 semitone, going from D natural to D sharp. That changed the quality of the triad from major to augmented. In the 3rd measure, we're in the key of B major. We have a /5/3. Do nothing to the 3, simply write it and leave it, but raise the 5th 1 semitone. Since F sharp is already in our key signature, and we have to raise it again 1 semitone and still call it a triad, we must include a double sharp next to the F. This triad is now augmented. Let's answer some true and false questions. You have 2 questions. A slash through a symbol calls for a sharp. True or false? Number 2, a slash through a symbol means that the note represented by the number is raised 1/2 step. Think about it. Number 1, a slash through a symbol calls for a sharp. Well, we're going to have to call that false because it doesn't always call for a sharp. It could, but if you look at measure 1, for example, we have a /5, but we have a D natural. Number 2, a slash through a symbol means that the note represented by the number is raised 1/2 step. That is indeed true. How did you do? Let's move right along. Okay, college, we're going to review our figured bass symbols because on the next frame, you're going to put them to work. So hopefully you have a good knowledge and understanding of this so far. Let's review. When we see the sharp sign alone, that means we're going to sharpen or raise the 3rd above the bass. When we see a sharp sign with a numeral, we're going to sharpen the appropriate note above the bass. When we see a flat sign alone, we're going to flatten or lower the 3rd above the bass. When we see a flat sign with a numeral, we're going to flatten the appropriate note above the bass. When we see a natural sign alone, we will naturalize. And remember, that may mean to raise or lower depending on the context. The 3rd above the bass. When we see a natural with a numeral, we're going to naturalize the appropriate note above the bass. And then we have the slash. The slash alone means to raise the note a 3rd above the bass. The slash with a numeral means to raise the appropriate note above the bass. One last look at this before we do our activity. Okay, we are going to write the triads from the given root and apply accidentals as indicated by the figured bass. Clearly, all of these given notes are the root. And we know that because if we look at all the numbers, we see 5/3, which is an indication of root position triads. Please keep in mind that each measure has a different key signature. Observe your key signature, observe your figured bass symbols, and build the requested triads. Good luck, college. Okay, college, let's check our solutions together. The first thing I would do is go through each of these and build root position triads, and then go back and realize the figured base. So that's what I'm going to do now. Now that I have all my root position triads built, I can observe and realize the figured base. Measure 1, flat 5, 3. What does that mean? That means to go a fifth above the lowest note and lower it 1/2 step. The triad is now diminished. Measure 2, 5, sharp 3. Go a third above the lowest note and raise it 1/2 step, or sharpen it. The triad is now major. Measure 3, 5/3. Go a third above the lowest note and raise it 1/2 step. I've gone from E flat to E natural. The triad is now major. Measure 4, 5/3. Do not alter the third or the fifth. This triad is major. Bass clef, measure 1, 5, flat 3. Lower the third, 1/2 step, going from C sharp to C natural. Bass clef, measure 2, /5, 3. Raise the fifth above the lowest note, 1/2 step, going from D flat to D natural. Bass clef, measure 3, 5, natural 3. Naturalize the third note above the lowest. Bass clef, measure 4, flat 5, flat 3. Flat 5 means to go a fifth above the lowest note and lower it 1/2 step, going from F sharp to F natural. Flat 3, go a third above the lowest note and lower it 1/2 step, going from D sharp to D flat. And there you have it. Let's check the qualities of the ones in bass clef. ACE. This triad is minor. Bass clef, measure 2, G flat, B flat, D natural. This triad is augmented. Bass clef, measure 3, G, B natural, D. This triad is major. Bass clef, measure 4, B, D, F. This triad is diminished. How did you do? Hopefully okay. Trust me, you'll get better with this with practice. Let's move on. The story of figured bass symbols tops our headline today. An accidental not associated with a number refers to the interval of a third above the lowest note. In measure 1, we have 5, underneath that, a natural sign. That means that we're dealing with naturalizing the third above the lowest note. Note the natural sign because our key signature has a B flat in it. In the second measure, we have a 5, underneath that, just a sharp sign. That indicates raising the third above the lowest note 1/2 step, in this case, going from A to A sharp. In measure 3, we have 5, underneath that, the sharp sign. That indicates raising the third above the lowest note 1/2 step, going from F natural to F sharp. We are now going to write triads in root position as indicated by the figured bass symbols. You have 30 seconds. Good luck, college. Okay, college, we're going to check our work as I finish up just making my root position triads. Then I'll go back and realize the figured bass. In the first one, do nothing to the fifth, but lower the third above the lowest note 1/2 step. In the second measure, raise the fifth 1/2 step, going from D to D sharp, and raise the third 1/2 step, or naturalize it, which means going from B flat to B natural. Note your key signature. In the third measure, 5, do nothing to, and lower the third 1/2 step, going from a G to a G flat. We've now altered the quality of these triads. Can you name each quality? The first measure is minor, the second measure is augmented, and the third measure is minor. Don't forget, that's an E flat. Okay, college, so let's review some figured bass. Figured bass was widely used during the Baroque era. Figured bass is a shorthand notation for keyboard instruments. Figured bass helps us for future topics, such as part writing. And figured bass is a shorthand system of indicating notes above the bass. From this point on, we will only be using figured bass symbols that are necessary. In other words, we will use the abbreviated symbols. Generally, no figuration is needed for a triad in root position except to show the alteration by accidentals of either the third or fifth of the triad. Let's take a look here. In measure 1 with the flat 5, here the symbol flat 5 is used to show the alteration of E to E flat. The 5 would not be needed if we did not want to alter the fifth. Because we're altering the fifth, we need flat 5. In measure 2 and measure 3 and measure 5, the figured bass is not needed because we are not altering the third and or the fifth above the root position triad. So we just leave the triad as is. In measure 4, we have a sharp sign. Here, a sharp sign is used to show that the third above the lowest note is raised from G to G sharp. Now we're going to write figured bass symbols on the red line beneath each triad, only as needed. And you should recall that some questions may have multiple correct responses for proper figured bass. For example, we now know that the sharp and the slash may be used interchangeably. Observe the triad and any accidentals and see if you can supply the abbreviated figured bass and supply the correct symbols. Good luck, college. Okay, college, let's see how you did. Let's take a look at measure 1. First of all, we see a root position triad. We know that that's 5-3, but we don't have to write the 5 because we're not altering that high note, the fifth. It's just going to be an A. But if we look carefully, the third above the lowest note is altered. It seems to be raised 1/2 step. So when we have the third above the lowest note raised 1/2 step, our figured bass symbol could be just a sharp sign, like so, or it could be just a slash by itself with no figure. Sometimes we may also see this, although that is redundant and you don't come across that often. Sometimes you may see this as well, but again, that is not common. The best answers would be the sharp sign alone or the slash sign alone. Number 2, hopefully you didn't write anything because you don't need to. The third and the fifth above the lowest note are not altered, and since we're using abbreviated figured bass, we don't need to include the 5-3 because they're not altered. In measure 3, we've done nothing to the third, so we don't have to write a 3. We have altered the fifth by raising it 1/2 step. If we look at the key signature, we have an E flat. We've gone from E flat to E natural, so we've naturalized it. We can use a natural. We'd have to put the 5 there, like so. Or perhaps you just did a 5 with a slash, or a sharp and then a 5 next to it would also work. Those are possible answers for number 3. In measure 4, we've done nothing to the third, but we have raised the fifth 1/2 step. We can't put a natural sign there. That wouldn't make sense. But we can do a sharp 5 or a /5, like so. In the next line, the first measure, we have raised the third, going from a D to a D sharp. So we could simply put the sharp sign like so. Sharp signs alone indicate that we are raising the third above the lowest note 1/2 step. Or we could possibly put a slash alone. You may encounter this, but it's very uncommon, where you have a sharp 3 and a 3 with a slash through it. That's uncommon and redundant, so we don't really want to do that. In the next measure, we have naturalized the third above the lowest note, going from a B flat to a B natural. A simple natural sign by itself would suffice. Or perhaps you did a slash, that would also work, or a sharp by itself. In the next measure, we have lowered the third above the lowest note. So a flat sign by itself is an indicator that we are lowering the third 1/2 step above the lowest note. We don't have to do anything for the fifth. In the last measure, we have lowered the third and the fifth 1/2 step. So we would write a flat 5 and then a flat sign underneath it. No 3 is necessary because remember, a figured bass symbol by itself without a number attached to it means we're dealing with the third above the lowest note. So those are the responses. How did you do? This will get easier in time the more we practice. Okay, college, so on this frame I have 2 questions for you. What major key could this be? And what minor key could this be? After you realize those 2 questions, then realize the figured bass and supply the notes above the bass. Look carefully. The given note is going to be the lowest note of the triad. Do not write notes below the given note. Observe your figured bass carefully and observe your symbols carefully and see if you can build the requested notes above the bass. We'll check our work in about 2 minutes. Good luck. About 30 seconds left. I should take this time to remind you that over here to the right hand side we're still dealing with 2 flats. We're in bass clef, so we still want B flats here and E flats. About 30 seconds left, college. Need another minute? No problem. Okay, college, let's check our work. We'll go over the solutions together and you can see how I did this. Number one, hopefully you figured out that the major key is B flat major and that the minor key is G minor, 2 flats. Let's realize the figured bass and supply the notes above them. So in the first one here, we have a B flat and we have nothing underneath that B flat. That indicates a root position triad, and the third and the fifth above that are not affected in any way with an accidental. So it would look like that. Next to that, we have a 6. 6, you recall, is the abbreviated version of a first inversion triad, right? The 3 is not there anymore because we're only using abbreviated. So we're going to count 6 up from the lowest note, and we land there, and 3 up from the lowest note, and we land there. And we discover that that's an F major triad in first inversion. We don't have to alter the 6 in any way, simply because there's no symbol on it or next to it. We do need the 6 though, because the 6 tells us that it's in first inversion. The next one is 6-4. 6-4 we know is in second inversion. We don't have to alter the 6 or alter the 4 because there's no symbols that go with it. That simply means go a 6th above the lowest note and go a 4th above the lowest note, and we've just created our second inversion triad. Let's head on over to the figured bass symbol area. Looks like our lowest note here is a D, and we have to raise the third above that 1/2 step and do nothing to the 5th. So I'm looking at a D, F sharp, A for that one. The next one, we have a B flat as the lowest note. Let's write the 5th in and do nothing to it. But we need to lower the third above the lowest note. So we're going from a D to a D flat. In the next example, we have a root position triad with a raised third above the lowest note because of the natural sign. In other words, we're naturalizing that. We're going from E flat to E natural. In the next one, it looks like we have a slash through a 6. Well, the 6 indicates that we are in first inversion, and we don't need the 3 because we're not doing anything to it. Let's go a 6th above the lowest note, and since there's a slash, we'll have to make it an F sharp. Don't forget about the third above the lowest note and put it right there. In the last example, we have a slash 6-4. That indicates second inversion, only this time we have to raise the 6th above the lowest note. Travel a 6 above the lowest note. The note is an E flat. We need to raise it to an E natural. And we go a 4th above the lowest note, which is not altered. How did you do? Okay, we'll continue practicing this. But for right now, let's review. In summary, a triad in root position usually requires no figuration unless either the third or the 5th is altered. Number 2, a slash through a number means that the note represented by the number is raised 1/2 step. Number 3, an accidental in the figured bass that is not associated with a number refers to the interval of a third above the bass. Thanks for watching, college. Make it a great day. Okay, college, I want to revisit this frame for a minute, and I have another activity for you. I'm going to circle this side, these 3 triads, and what I would like you to do is, in the key of B flat major, analyze the Roman numerals. So we're having a capital B flat with a colon, and please provide a Roman numeral analysis for those 3 triads in the key of B flat major. Let's see what you come up with, and then we'll check our answers. Good luck! Okay, college, I'm about to reveal some answers, so see how you did. And there you have it. So college, hopefully you got the Roman numerals right at the very least. In the key of B flat, we have the tonic triad B flat, D, F with a B flat in the bass. The B flat is the lowest note, so this triad's in root position, and the triad is major, so it's capital Roman numeral 1. In the next chord, we have F, A, C. F is the root, F, A, C is a major triad, but A is the lowest note, so this triad's in first inversion. So we're dealing with a capital 5, and we must include the 6 to indicate that it's first inversion. F is the root, and F is the 5th scale degree in the key of B flat. That's where the 5 comes from. In the last chord, we have a major 4, 6, 4. You have to find the root, which is E flat. E flat is the 4th scale degree in the key of B flat. That's why we get the 4. This triad is in second inversion because the 5th of that triad is the lowest note. We must include the 6-4 next to the Roman numeral. Since the triad is major, we use a capital Roman numeral 4. How did you do? More on this coming soon. Make it a great day, college, and thanks so much for watching.